please come up to stand. And see, what do you notice about yourself? Even notice, what's it like to think about that question? What you notice about yourself. Is that an interesting question? And then have a little slow walk around and observe yourself walking. What do you notice? And see, when you're walking around, where is your center? What does that even mean? Is it the place that you get your power or your strength for movement? Or do you think your center is an emotional thing? Or maybe it's something else? And just take a little note to self. And then shift your attention a little bit and notice your back as you're walking and just see what you notice about it. And again, take a little mental note, file it away, put it in the back of your mind, and then come find a place on the floor and lay down on your back. And bring your legs down long and bring your arms by your sides. Now, if it's not comfortable at all to have your legs long, then you can always keep your knees bent and your feet standing instead. And then take a little time to bring your attention down to the feeling of the floor along the back of you. And notice your own attention. What do you start to pay attention to? Ultimately, the Feldenkrais method is a practice of self-knowing. And we use all kinds of interesting strategies to help you in that process. But the process doesn't stand alone. It requires your curiosity. And that way, it's not necessarily a practice for everybody, for every point in your life. And although these are awareness through movement lessons, and it's got that word movement in it, they're really not movement classes at all. We use the movement as the focal point of your attention. Now, this is not a lesson that's really made for beginners. And it's not because there's levels in Feldenkrais, but it's because it's actually a skill that we refine. So what's most important, whether you've done this for years or you're new to it, is to take care of yourself and to take care of your own learning experience. So if you are experiencing any kind of pain or discomfort, any kind of pain or discomfort, don't do it. There's zero advantage in continuing when there's pain or discomfort. If you're checking out, you keep finding yourself thinking about something or just drifting off, don't force yourself to stay in the lesson, right? Let yourself do what you need to do. And maybe if you give yourself that space, you'll come back to the lesson, and maybe not, right? Maybe for you, learning today is a very small very delicate, beautiful little moment. Now, notice the particular way that you're making contact with the floor. And see if you can feel any kind of difference in the way the back of your right leg, from your heel, up your calf, to your thigh, to your buttock. Is there any difference in the way your right leg is resting on the floor versus the way that your left leg from the heel, calf, thigh, buttock is resting on the floor? And can you sense the two sides of your spine from your right buttock along the side of the curvature of your low back, up the back of your right rib cage, and then to your right shoulder blade, and then the right side of your neck, right up to the ridge at the back of your skull, and then the right side of the back of your skull. And then notice the way that your right arm connects through your shoulder joint and somehow becomes related to the whole right side of your spine. And then bring your attention back to your right leg and see the way that you feel the connection between your right leg and the right side of your spine. Notice the whole right side of you resting on the floor, even your right cheek and your right eye, your right nostril, your right ear. Now I want to ask you a funny question. When you have your attention on the right side of you like this, what is your perspective for sensing? Is your right eye at all involved in the way that you see the right side of you? Is your right eye looking out into the world even with your eyes closed? Or is there some sense of your right eye dropping back as though you could see yourself from the inside? Now see what it feels like for you to switch your attention over to your left side. First, just the left side of your spine. So from the back of the left side of your pelvis, your left buttock, the curvature of your low back on the left, where the left side of your rib cage makes some kind of contact with the floor, left shoulder blade maybe making some kind of contact with the floor. Get a sense of where the base of the left side of your neck is, and the journey from the base of your neck to the ridge at the back of your skull, and then the whole surface area of the left side of the back of your skull. On the left side, notice the way that you feel the connection between your left arm into your shoulder joint. And then how does your left leg fit into the image of your torso, your trunk, hip, back, shoulder, neck on the left side? What do you notice about your left eye? Now, notice the kind of attention you're using. And this is interesting too, right? Because especially if it's difficult for you to stay connected to your sensation, I see this all the time, and I definitely experience this too sometimes, which is we actually end up using a great degree of effort just to sense ourselves. So then the question is, what if you had a less intent approach? What if you were a little bit more at ease about sort of lightly sensing yourself, but maybe not with explicit detail, right? And what changes for you if you can just sort of soften your lens a little bit as you return to the sense of your whole self, making contact on the floor? And could your attention be so light that you're actually kind of resting? You're aware, but you're resting. What kind of influence does your breathing have on the feeling along your back? And if you can feel any kind of movement of your breathing in your back, what expresses itself in your chest? What happens to the space between your chest and your back? Bend your knees and stand your feet. Start to exaggerate the movement of breath in your chest. However it is that you're already doing it, just exaggerate it so it's more obvious to you. And see, does your chest seem to move more to your chin, more toward the ceiling? Maybe away from the ceiling? Something else. But see if you can keep your attention on the way that your breathing is moving in your chest. And if that affects the feeling in your back. Is there any point within that breath cycle, within that movement of your chest, that you actually have this sort of a clear sense of self-identification? Is there any part of your breath cycle that feels particularly familiar? Now bring your attention to your head and take your two hands and put your hands right at that ridge at the back of your skull, if that's okay for your shoulders. If it's uncomfortable for your shoulders, you can just imagine this part. So your fingers are literally at the top of your neck, right where your neck will intercept with your skull. And have your hands on either side of where you feel the upper vertebrae of your neck are. And you might notice that there's kind of like a little bit of a divot or a soft spot there. And just super gently, not like you're giving yourself a massage, but just the lightest pressure, just kind of lift your finger pads toward the ceiling so that you kind of press into that little, yeah, I don't know, divot at the base of your skull, the back of your neck. And then you can take your time. Again, don't do anything that's uncomfortable for your shoulders. But if it's comfortable, if it's fine, then just lightly, in this very curious way, as though your hands were your eyes, start to walk your fingertips down each side of your neck spine, which, you know, there might be a lot of dense tissue there, so you're not really sure where the bone is. But sort of the idea of where you imagine each side of your spine is, and just lightly walk your fingertips down toward the base of your neck. Just sort of a light lifting of your finger pads in the direction of the ceiling. And then when you get down to the base of your neck, you come back up toward the ridge, and your finger pads are right underneath the ridge. And pay attention to if you have any resistance to your own hands, if you're tightening it all on your neck, and see how supple your neck, how responsive your neck could be. So that it's possible that even by just slightly lifting your finger pads toward the ceiling, that you'll slightly shift the position of your neck. And then the next time that you make your way back up to the ridge, stay there. So again, your fingers are kind of tucked underneath the ridge. And then with a little bit more deliberate action, lift your fingers toward the ceiling there, and see if you can start to get the feeling that your head tilts back slightly. And you might need to play with it a little bit. And if you don't feel it, it's fine. It's not important. It's just an idea, just a way for you to see yourself with your hands for a moment. And you might get a sense that by lifting underneath the ridge of your skull, your head tilts back. And again, depends on your shoulders, if your arms are okay in the situation. You might actually be able to sort of lengthen the ridge of your skull away from your shoulders so that your chin actually comes down a little bit and your neck feels like it gets a bit longer. So again, don't worry about mastering anything, just curious what sort of delicate movement could evoke some sort of response in the position of your head. But now listen, as you're playing with that, pay attention to your chest. And I want you to do a little of your own research, okay? So I want you to do a expansion of your chest, like you're about to take a huge breath before, I don't know, before you dive into something, before you, whatever. You take a huge breath into your chest, okay? And again, if it's okay for your arms, your shoulders to be in that position, then just feel what it feels like to be holding your own neck when you expand your chest. And then if you can, try breathing out and sink your chest down toward the floor and see what that feels like. And just compare the difference. And maybe you don't even lift your neck at all anymore. Maybe your fingers are just quietly listening, and you just feel if the movement of your chest evokes any movement in your neck, your skull. And if you do feel any kind of connection, or maybe you're not sure what you're feeling, yeah, maybe something's there, I don't really know, I don't know what's happening. Listen and see, when you're feeling your chest, can you connect to the idea that your chest is part of your back? So whatever you feel in your neck, you listen in your chest and you listen in your back. And you just see, right? Answer might be, I don't know, nothing's happening. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so you're just curious. Oh, I wonder what's there. So far, nothing's there yet. Okay. Now let that go. Bring your arms down by your sides and straighten out your legs on the floor. And observe the way that you see yourself. And just a couple times in this position, again, deliberately expand your chest. Always get an image of like an umbrella opening. So your chest kind of lifts and opens. And then, yeah, if you were to close the umbrella, your chest would sort of drop and flatten. And again, that's a movement for a lot of people that's very mysterious. So you just see what you can do. And it's interesting because you can do it with your breathing, and you could also try to do it without using your breathing. Maybe you pause your breathing and you feel just muscularly what it's like to expand your chest and contract your chest. Now, without using your arms or your hands, start to lengthen the back of your neck and find out if you can subtly lift your skull away from the floor and then bring it back down. And notice the kind of effort. Can we say it again? Yeah. So you're not using your arms, and you're just starting out by seeing if you can lengthen the back of your neck. And then if you could just sort of peel your head away from the floor. Now, do that and also expand your chest like you're about to take a huge breath in. Have your chest big, powerful, strong chest, and see what it feels like to try to lift your head. Do that a couple times so you're clear. Make sure you're not straining yourself. Right? Make sure you're not clenching your teeth or your throat, your tongue. Now, could you do the opposite with your chest? So that when you lift your head, your chest sinks down to the floor, down toward your legs. And could you start using your exhale to soften and flatten your chest? Lengthen the back of your neck, and then lift your head. Okay, give yourself a nice rest. You need to change your position. You want to rest on your side, right? Remember to take care of yourself. Resting is for you to rest your brain. Now, the other window that we open, right, is sometimes curiosity can be a misnomer. Curiosity can be misconstrued as searching for an answer, right? So there's the process of searching for an answer. It's not the same as curiosity. To just be in a moment, to be in a process, right? And that is the crux of what we do here. That's what we try to figure out. Okay, so bend your knees and stand your feet again. And bring your arms out to the sides. And just a few more times, lightly, without any kind of ambition. No award ceremony at the end of the session, just this curiosity of how you could find a way to start to peel your head away from the floor with the least amount of effort. And really pay attention to where you feel muscle contractions. It's fascinating. Because the moment that we are determined to do something, I was just reading this last night actually. Feldenkrais literally called it an insecurity. Which, not that I necessarily recommend reading his books, but also I kind of recommend reading his books. Not cover to cover, but there's so many little gems in there. And so he talks about how superfluous effort in the muscles comes from insecurity. So you recruit the thing that can give you the best promise of an outcome, which is a great thing to do, right? And it's not the same as being an integrated whole that is just part of a process. Okay, now leave that, bring your legs down long, and put yourself in the shape of an X. Your arms and your legs are like an X. And in this situation, notice the length of yourself. How long? If you took a little measuring tape and you measured yourself from the back of your pelvis, your sacrum, to the back of your skull. Imagine how long that measuring tape is. Notice if there's parts of the measuring tape that kind of get dark or disappear. That happens a lot. And then measure from the back of your pelvis to your heels, or to a point, between your heels. Compare the two lengths, from the back of your pelvis to the back of your head, and from the back of your pelvis to a point between your two heels. And now again, consider, where is your center? Use your imagination only to feel what it would be like to lengthen your right arm, just as it is. To lengthen your right arm way beyond what you ever thought you could do. Just imagine the feeling. And then to return. And where do you imagine getting the power to do that funny movement? And then do it for real. Lengthen your right arm. And then return. And see if you can notice your own habits. What's your first line of defense? If you want to lengthen your arm, what's the first thing you would do? And then turn the lengthening of your arm into a lifting of your arm. And see, what is the smallest amount that you could lift your arm? Keep asking yourself, is there any room for refinement? Is there potential for a more delicate action? And so what happens to your back when you lift your arm? Which way do you shift your weight? Try barely lifting your arm. Barely. Let your wrist and your fingers hang toward the floor. And then see what happens if, as you're lifting your arm, you also lift your head. And what are you doing with your chest? What are you doing with your respiration? Okay. And then leave it and just rest for a moment. And then come over to your front side. Make yourself into an X on your front. And notice what you chose for your head. And just keep your head the way that it is. And continue as gently as you can, lifting your right arm and then bringing it back down. Listen to the kind of muscular contractions you feel. See if anything changes if you first lengthen your right arm before lifting it. So now, whichever direction your face is, turn your face the other way and see what changes in your experience of lifting your right arm. Where is your center when you're in this position? Try it with your forehead down on the floor. And find out if you're not already, what happens if you use your exhale just like you did when you were on your back. Now, some of you will find that you shift your weight to the right when you lift your right arm. Some of you will find that you actually shift your weight to the left. So now put your left cheek down on the floor and continue lifting your right arm as you're breathing out and shift your weight slightly to the right and see what that variation is like for you. What kind of effort do you feel? And then what changes if you shift your weight slightly to the left when you lift your right arm and breathe out? But it's just a movement of your arm. I know sometimes we do lessons where it's a movement of your pelvis or becomes a crawling lesson. This is just about your arm. And it's tempting. It's tempting to do a bigger movement. It's tempting to really get somewhere with this, right? This lesson comes from the Awareness Through Movement book, and it's called The Foundations of Movement, because long before you ever do a thing, there's where the thing begins. Okay, roll over and rest on your back with your arms down and your legs long. And see what you notice about the two sides of yourself now, the way that you're making contact with the floor. It's a tough sell, this Feldenkrais thing, right? Because the idea is that if you see more of yourself, you open up so much more of your own potential. But if someone hasn't yet seen more of themselves, then they're not going to be totally convinced about seeing more of their own potential, right? So like probably all the most beautiful things in life, it is by its nature a process. So now go into your X shape here on your back again. Your arms are up alongside your head, wherever they can be without strain in your shoulders, or your legs are wide apart. Keep following your exhalation and the feeling of your chest, and now revisit. See what it's like now to lift your right arm away from the floor. And has that changed at all? And then again, try it several times completely in your imagination. And notice your center. Notice how deep down into yourself you can stay connected when you imagine lifting your right arm. And now, imagine lifting your right leg. Just imagine it. And it's funny, right? Because you might actually feel that there's some little micro contractions that happen even just in your imagining anticipation, right? And so while your limb is way down there, doing limb business, being very heavy and awkward, how do you resource yourself? How do you connect to your greater sense of wholeness when things get a little precarious, a little heavy on the distal end? See what it feels like to actually lift your right leg and bring it back down. And if your objective isn't to be ace at leg lifting, and instead your objective is to be as whole as possible, could that change something about your strategy of lifting your leg? And now lift your arm and your leg. And if two very heavy parts of yourself lift away from the floor, what part of yourself moves toward the floor? Oh, I'd be super clear about this. So again, go back to where we started. Make a big chest. Lift your chest, big, strong, proud chest. Yeah. And then feel what that feels like to lift your right arm, your right leg. And that might be familiar for some of you. Now see what happens if you do the opposite. So that you soften your chest, you soften your low back, you soften your back ribs. And instead of the space behind your back getting higher, the space behind your back gets a little bit lower. Is it helpful to add in lifting your head? Or does that make it harder to lift your arm and leg? Let it go. Bring your arms down. And again, compare the two sides of you resting on the floor. And then one last time, come onto your front side. Same shape as on your back. Make yourself into a wide X. Put your left cheek down. Work with your exhalation and see what it feels like to lift your right arm and your right leg. Do you use your back the same way as when you're on your back side? What changes if you lengthen your limbs before you lift? How is that different? And if you add in your head, lengthen your right arm, lengthen your right leg, lengthen right from your center, and then lift. Then try it so that you lean onto your right side to lift your right side. Notice the kind of effort that you use. Try it so that you lean to your left as you lift your right side. All the time, still lifting your right arm and right leg. Left cheek down on the floor. And the idea is that you could somehow use the left side of your back, left side of your torso. And instead of shrinking yourself, which again, this goes back to what Feldenkrais was saying in the book about insecurity, instead of shrinking yourself to recruit the strength that you already know, what if you were to lengthen yourself? What if your spine got longer to lift your limbs as opposed to getting shorter? So come onto your back. Pause for a moment if you can with your arms by your sides and your legs long. Just again, reflect on if your image of yourself is different on the right and the left. Of course, if you need to change your position or bring your knees in your chest, do. And then one last time, make yourself into an X. And again, as delicately as you can, feel what it feels like now to lift your right arm a few times, bring it back down. Is there anything changing in your experience of yourself doing that? And you could try a few times doing your leg and arm together. You could try one and then the other. Just do a little bit of your own research and see, okay, so I have made it through this barely doing anything. And what of it? What changes for me? And then rest. So for you guys that are actively studying Feldenkrais, I actually really highly suggest at some point, maybe later today or whenever, it'd be really interesting to go back and revisit this with your left side, and also to compare to your right side, which you had done previously. But now, as usual, take 5 minutes on your own to integrate, and however it's meaningful to you. I do suggest sooner than later to come back to a standing and walking, and to really take your time observing if there's anything different in how you use yourself. I will leave you to enjoy your integration time. Bye for now.